Imagine standing next to a pipe of specialized PVC tubing that is basically 8 feet tall.
Right, just massive.
Yeah, so massive that a human musician literally has to stand up and wrap their entire upper body around it just to reach the keys.
It's basically architectural at that point.
Exactly. And the mouthpiece on this thing is the size of a teacup. When the musician exhales into it, they have to push such a violent volume of air from their diaphragm that, they can only sustain the note for maybe 4 seconds before blacking out.
Oh, absolutely. The physical toll is absurd.
And the crazy part is, the sound that comes out, it isn't even really a note. It's more like a subsonic earthquake.
Yeah, you're down at like 15 hertz.
Right, 15 hertz. It drops completely below the threshold of human hearing. So it bypasses your eardrums entirely, and it simply rattles the bones in your rib cage.
You feel it before you hear it, if you hear it at all.
Exactly. So now I want you to imagine 20 of those instruments playing in perfect, staggering counterpoint alongside this choir of shrieking piccolos.
Which is acoustically impossible for humans to pull off.
Right. Human lungs cannot physically sustain this. The physical endurance required just doesn't exist. But today, an artificial intelligence framework has actually mapped it out, generated it, and rendered it into reality.
It's wild because it forces a complete recalibration of what we even consider acoustic music. When you remove the biological limits of the human lung, the whole concept of orchestration just fractures into something entirely unmapped.
It really does. And we are jumping straight into the deep end today. If you are tuning in, you are likely a serious musician, maybe a professional flautist, an audio engineer, or just someone tracking the absolute bleeding edge of compositional theory.
Right, so we're skipping the basics.
Oh, totally. We are skipping the definitions of standard notation. We are here to deconstruct a monumental sonic event. It's a 56-minute, 20-track symphony titled Breath Between Forms, a flute atlas of becoming.
And the stakes here really need to be clear from the jump. We are not analyzing some novelty AI track.
No, not at all.
We have all endured the gimmicky generated pop songs that flood the internet. This is a rigorously conceptualized, through composed work of high art.
Yeah.
The classical discipline of a chamber ensemble is totally maintained, but it's forced to dissolve into this highly immersive, fluid sonic environment.
So the mission for this deep dive is to deconstruct exactly how this piece utilizes an open-source artificial intelligence stack to orchestrate this impossibly massive 7+ octave flute ensemble. We are looking at full theoretical and technical depth. No simplifications today.
Exactly. We will systematically dissect the acoustic realities of rendering this complete flute family.
Which is a nightmare.
A total acoustic nightmare. We'll break down the highly experimental sound design mandated by the text prompt, and we'll trace the 5-phase structural arc of the entire 56-minute symphony.
And we also have to examine the specific tech stack, right? From perchance.org all the way to Audacity 4.
Right, and ultimately confront the philosophical implications of AI functioning as a modern aleatoric instrument.
Okay, let's unpack this. The text prompt for this piece, which was fed directly into Google Flow Music, demanded an acoustic ecosystem that spans the absolute extremes of human and mechanical breath.
It's the entire flute family deployed simultaneously.
Yeah.
The orchestration dictated by the prompt is just mercilessly comprehensive. It requires the piccolo, the standard C flutes, divided into flute 1 and flute 2.
The standard stuff so far.
Right. But then we get the alto flute, the bass flute, the contralto flute, the contrabass flute, the subcontrabass flute, and finally, the double contrabass flute.
Which is just staggering. Let's talk about the acoustic real estate that occupies, because, a 7+ octave range within a single timbral family is just an acoustic nightmare to balance.
It's almost physically impossible in a live room.
Exactly. So you start way up in the stratosphere with the piccolo. The prompt assigns the piccolo these fragmented crystalline motifs, living mostly in the D7 register.
And D7 on a piccolo is, it's violent.
It really is.
The frequency is pushing 2300 hertz. To hit that register cleanly, a flautist has to use an incredibly fast, highly pressurized airstream, and it has to be focused through a very tight embouchure.
Right.
The sound wave is piercing. It cuts through a full symphony orchestra of 100 pieces without any amplification.
Yeah, it just slices right through.
And in this AI-generated ensemble, the piccolo is carrying the fragile, glittering, thematic material, but doing so with a frequency that naturally dominates absolutely any mix.
And then beneath that, we have the C flutes. And the prompt treats flute 1 and flute 2 almost like a traditional Renaissance vocal choir.
Yeah, strict counterpoint.
Right. They're engaging in this strict classical voice-leading counterpoint. It's clean, it's functional harmony. But then you drop down to the alto flute, which the prompt positions as the lyric emotional center of the piece.
Which makes sense. The alto flute is pitched in G, so that's a perfect fourth below the standard flute, and its bore is significantly wider.
And that changes the overtone series, right?
Exactly. Because of that wider cylindrical tube, the overtone series it produces is fundamentally different. It suppresses some of those higher partials that give the standard C flute its brightness.
So it's much darker.
Really dark. Dark, breathy, and incredibly warm. The composer uses the specific harmonic profile to carry the introspective lyrical melodies. It acts as this psychological anchor between those shrieking piccolos up top and the subterranean low instruments at the bottom.
And as we move into those low instruments, the physical reality of the instrument really starts fighting the musician.
Oh, completely.
Like the bass flute, which is pitched a full octave below the C flute. It's tasked with these elongated, breath-weighted phrases. But anyone who has played a bass flute knows that sustaining an elongated phrase is just a paradox.
Right, because the tube is so massive that your air column just vanishes instantly.
You're constantly running out of breath.
The bass flute requires high volume but low pressure. You're basically dumping air into the instrument just to excite the air column enough for it to even speak. And what's fascinating is the AI renders this struggle perfectly. The audible rush of the air, like the physical friction of the breath against the strike edge of the embouchure hole, that actually becomes a critical timbral component.
Right. The prompt didn't ask for a pure synthesized sine wave.
Exactly. It asked for the physical friction of human limitation.
And that friction turns into outright dissolution when we hit the contralto flute. The text prompt explicitly tasks the contralto with dissolving pitch into pure air noise.
It totally bridges the gap between a pitched instrument and basically a wind machine.
Yeah. And below that, we hit the architectural foundation, the contrabass flute, pitched 2 octaves below the standard flute.
Which is constructed in that massive number 4 shape, just so the keys are even reachable by human arms.
Right. The prompt treats these as slow-moving tonal pillars, heavily akin to the 32-foot pipes on a cathedral organ. They don't play melodies, they play structural support.
You're the foundation of the house.
Which brings us back to the absolute basement, the subcontrabass and the double contrabass flutes. The source text explicitly states they are meant to create, and I'm quoting here, ultra-low frequency harmonic beds felt more than heard.
Yes.
So let me pose a question about the traditional definition of orchestration here.
Okay, go for it.
If a composer writes a part for double contrabass flute that generates frequencies down around, say, 15 to 20 hertz, the human ear doesn't process that as a pitch.
Right, the tympanic membrane doesn't track it as a musical note.
Exactly, it tracks it as atmospheric pressure.
Yeah.
So are we crossing the line from music composition into, like, seismology? If the primary output is vibration, how is an AI or even a human structuring that musically?
Well, you are structuring it spatially rather than harmonically. When you write for the double contrabass in this context, you are literally composing the displacement of air in the room.
Wow.
You are writing geological weight. The fundamental challenge here, which the AI had to solve, is the extreme dynamic imbalance.
Because of the piccolo.
Right. We established how unbelievably loud a piccolo D7 is. The subcontrabass flute, by contrast, is incredibly quiet.
Yeah, the energy is all low-frequency rumble, which disperses omnidirectionally.
Exactly. In a physical concert hall, the piccolo would instantly obliterate the double contrabass. You would literally never hear the low flutes without an aggressive close miking strategy.
But close miking, a massive low-register flute, introduces this horrific set of audio engineering problems.
Oh, it's a nightmare.
Right. If I take a large diaphragm condenser microphone and I jam it an inch away from the embouchure hole of a subcontrabass flute just to capture the fundamental pitch, I am going to get bombarded by the wind tunnel effect of the player's exhalation.
The diaphragm of the mic will just completely distort from the plosive blasts of air.
Yeah, but then if I pull the mic back, say 3 feet to let the air dissipate, the inverse square law kicks in, and that 20 hertz fundamental pitch is completely swallowed by the room tone.
It's like trying to photograph a ghost in a hurricane.
That is the perfect analogy.
And furthermore, you have embouchure-dependent intonation instability.
Right.
As the tube gets larger and wider, the pitch center becomes incredibly malleable. A flautist cannot maintain a perfectly rigid airstream. As they run out of breath, the airspeed drops and the pitch just sags flat.
Yeah, the fundamental frequency is constantly shifting microtonally.
What is so fascinating about this is that the AI rendering this symphony did not autocorrect this instability into perfect, A440 tuning.
It left it raw.
It recognized that the acoustic reality of the double contrabass is its instability. Traditional staff notation is highly inadequate for this.
Yeah, because you can write a low C on a staff, but you cannot easily notate, play this C, let the pitch sag 30 cents flat as your diaphragm exhausts, and gradually transition the fundamental into broadband white noise.
Exactly. A semantic text prompt, however, can dictate that exact physical and emotional trajectory.
And the acoustic instability of these massive flutes forces a complete departure from pure, clean pitch. You can't just write a Bach chorale for a double contrabass flute.
No, it would sound like mud.
Right. And that limitation acts as the catalyst for the entire sound design of the piece. The composer didn't just ask Google Flow Music for a flute choir. The prompt mandates an exhaustive lexicon of extended techniques. It basically turns the acoustic flute family into an electroacoustic synthesizer.
We see this immediately with the use of breath tones and air sounds.
Which is usually a mistake, right?
Exactly. In classical repertoire, air noise is a flaw. You spend your entire conservatory training trying to focus your tone to eliminate the hiss. But here, the prompt isolates that hiss.
Yeah.
In the contralto and bass registers, unpitched breath tones are treated as rhythmic events. The rush of air across the strike edge is weaponized as a timbral layer, functioning the exact way a snare brush or a hi-hat would in a traditional electronic track.
Okay, let's look at the key clicks, because this completely blew my mind when I realized what the AI was doing.
It's so clever.
The source material demands a highly specific electronic environment. It mentions the integration of chill hop and techno beat structures. Yeah. But it also explicitly bans all non-flute instrumentation.
No drum machines.
Right. No 808s, no synthesized percussion. So how does the AI build a driving techno beat? He uses the mechanical clatter of the flute's pad striking the tone hole.
Yeah, the key click is just the percussive byproduct of the instrument's machinery. When a flautist depresses a key forcefully, the metal cup containing a felt pad slaps against the drawn metal rim of the tone hole.
Right, and it creates a sharp, transient acoustic click.
And the AI isolated that microscopic transient. It likely EQ'd out the resonant frequencies of the flute tube, heavily compressed it, and mapped it straight onto a grid.
It's amazing. That sharp mechanical attack serves as the sole percussive layer against those chill hop and techno beats.
It's literally repurposing the skeleton of the instrument.
And then it starts messing with the internal acoustic physics through multiphonics.
Oh, the multiphonics are incredible.
For anyone tuning in who isn't a woodwind player, a flute is fundamentally designed to vibrate at one primary frequency at a time, based on the length of the tube you've closed off with your fingers.
Right.
But a multiphonic forces the tube to mathematically break.
Yeah. By utilizing highly unorthodox cross-fingerings, so leaving certain keys open that should technically be closed, and simultaneously manipulating the angle and speed of the airstream, a flautist can actually force the air column inside the tube to vibrate at multiple nodal points at once.
It's wild. You are essentially tricking the acoustic space into sounding two or more partials simultaneously.
But they don't sound pretty.
No, they clash.
They clash violently. Because the nodes are fighting for dominance within a single cylindrical space, the resulting pitches are rarely in perfect harmonic ratios.
Yeah.
They are gritty, unstable, and deeply dissonant. The AI uses these multiphonics to blur the traditional voice leading of the C flues into these dense microtonal clusters. The harmony physically grinds against itself.
And we hear this peak in track I, Crystalline Inception, with the use of overblowing on the piccolo.
Right.
Overblowing is standard practice, obviously. It's how you access the second and third octaves.
Right.
Speed up the air, the wavelength halves, and the pitch jumps an octave. But the prompt specifically asks for non-standard partial overblowing.
Which is terrifying on a piccolo.
Yeah. It forces the AI to simulate a piccolo player blowing so aggressively with such an incorrect angle that the fundamental pitch just shatters into these upper harmonic squeaks.
It is a harsh, really overpressurized sound.
Yet the piece takes those acoustic mistakes and weaves them into this coherent, sparkling, crystalline texture. It's almost like using violence to create glass.
That is a great way to put it. And that transformation of acoustic violence into texture is heavily reliant on the electronic environment mandated by the prompt, particularly the microtonal pitch bending.
Yes, track 3, Veils of the Alto.
right? Track 3 and also track 7, shifting membranes. The contralto flute is tasked with creating this dreamlike harmonic haze, and it achieves this not just through multiphonics, but by constantly bending the pitch between the standard semitones of the Western scale.
It's dragging the intonation so far off center that your ear just loses its harmonic anchor.
Exactly. This is a direct continuation of the spectral composition practice that was pioneered back in the late 20th century.
Like the French spectral school.
Right. Spectralism moves away from traditional chords and instead analyzes the harmonic spectrum, the actual acoustic overtone makeup of a single sound, and it uses that physical data to generate harmony. By bending the pitch microtonally, the contralto is exploring the space between the notes, basically turning melodic lines into a continuous shifting atmosphere.
Which brings us to the granular stretching. And here's where it gets really interesting.
Oh, this is the core of the piece.
Granular synthesis is a digital audio process. Imagine a strip of motion picture film. If you run it at 24 frames per second, you see a continuous motion. If you cut the film up, take a single frame, and duplicate it 1,000 times, you freeze time.
Yeah.
Granular synthesis does this to audio. It chops a recorded sound into microscopic grains, maybe 5 or 10 milliseconds long. It then reorganizes them, loops them, and overlaps them.
Right, which allows you to take a 2-second recording of a bass flute exhalation and stretch it into this static, unchanging drone that lasts for 4 minutes, completely independent of the pitch.
Yes, the prompt explicitly demanded the granular stretching of flute phrases into atmospheric textures. So let me throw this at you.
Okay.
We have taken a bass flute. We've chopped its acoustic waveform into 5-millisecond grains. We have deleted its transient attack. We have deleted the natural decay of the player's breath. We have stretched it into a synthetic drone. At what point does the acoustic identity of the flute actually die?
That is the question.
All right. Have we 𝗧𝗕sissed this instrument until it's just a synthesizer that happens to be wearing a flute's clothing?
I mean, it is the central existential anxiety of all electroacoustic music. Does the acoustic identity survive the digital processing?
Yeah.
If we look at the work of Eliane Radigue, a massive pioneer of drone and spectral music, she would use early synthesizers to create a continuous drone that evolved so microscopically over an hour that the listener's perception of time was entirely warped.
Wow.
The granular stretching here performs a very similar function, but with biological source material. The identity of the flute does not die. It is suspended.
Suspended. I like that.
Even when a bass flute breath is stretched over 4 minutes, the microscopic fluctuations of the human embouchure, the slight vibrato, the specific resonant frequency of the metal tube, that acoustic DNA actually remains embedded within each tiny grain of audio.
So the melodic material dissolves into atmosphere, but the physical source of the atmosphere is undeniably human breath, just stretched across a geological timescale.
Exactly. And the physical space that breath occupies is manipulated just as heavily.
Right, the reverb.
The spatial reverb in this piece is not treated as a post-production polish. The prompt specifically calls for spatial reverb shifting from intimate chamber space to cathedral-scale cavern resonance.
It is entirely structural.
Reverb here is an architectural boundary. When you hear the C flutes in strict counterpoint early in the piece, the reverb tail is almost non-existent. The pre-delay is extremely short.
Psychoacoustically, this tells your brain that you're sitting 2 feet away from the musicians in a small, acoustically dead, carpeted room.
Exactly. It is intimate and almost claustrophobic. But as a phrase develops, the AI manipulates the reverb parameters in real time. The decay time lengthens from half a second to 8 seconds. The high-frequency damping is removed.
And suddenly, the acoustic reflections are bouncing back at you from 100 feet away. The walls of the room literally rush outward at the speed of sound, and you realize you are standing alone in the center of an empty stone cathedral.
It's magic.
The spatial environment dictates the emotional weight of the phrase.
It is deeply disorienting, and this spatial expansion is paired with layered phase-offset looping.
Oh, this part is brilliant.
The AI takes a single flute motif and layers it over itself multiple times, but slightly out of phase. The playback speeds are fractionally different. This is a direct homage to Steve Reich's early phasing experiments, like It's Gonna Rain, where identical tape loops gradually fall out of sync, creating incredibly complex interlocking polyrhythms.
But Reich did it with spoken word or pianos. Doing this phasing within a single timbral family just 20 flutes drifting in and out of time with each other. It creates this massive acoustic illusion.
Yeah.
The prompt asks for the flute organism breathing as one entity, and that phase offset looping achieves it perfectly. It stops sounding like 20 individual players and starts sounding like a single massive lung inflating and collapsing.
And this concept of transformation at the micro level, the granular grains, the shifting reverb walls, the phasing loops, it forces a radical departure at the macro level.
Right. The structure of the piece itself.
Exactly. A traditional symphonic structure, like a sonata form, with its clear expositions and recapitulations, it simply cannot house audio that is actively melting. The transformation of the sound necessitates a completely fluid structural arc.
Which is why this 56-minute symphony has absolutely no rigid movements. When we examine the structural cartography of this piece, it is one continuous, through-composed state of becoming.
Yeah.
There are 20 tracks, but the index markers are purely arbitrary. The music bleeds seamlessly across them. There is never a true V-to-I harmonic resolution anywhere.
To contextualize this fluid architecture, we really have to reference Morton Feldman's concept of indeterminacy.
Oh, definitely.
Feldman wrote music that floated free of traditional rhythmic grids, focusing on the slow decay of sound in space rather than forward momentum. We also have to look at Umberto Eco's philosophy of opera parida, the open work.
The open work, right?
Eco argued that modern art should refuse to offer a singular, finalized, didactic conclusion. The artwork remains open to infinite interpretation and internal evolution. This AI symphony completely embodies the open work. It is a system of continuous evolution rather than a story with an ending.
But it does have a distinct topographical flow. Let's trace the 5 phases of this composition because the sonic journey here is just staggering.
Okay, let's break it down.
Phase 1 is emergence, and that encompasses tracks I through 3, crystalline inception, the first diffusion, and veils of the alto. If we paint the audio landscape here, this is where the sonic identity is literally born from the silence.
We hear those fragmented, aggressive piccolo squeaks we talked about.
Yeah, they are searching, hesitant, almost insect-like. Then the C flutes enter, trying to establish that Renaissance counterpoint, desperately trying to find a harmonic center amidst the piccolo fragments. It is the sound of the breath first entering the biological system, twitching to life.
And that nervous energy perfectly transitions into phase 2. Descent and grounding, which covers tracks 3 through 6, subterranean pillars, geological pulse, and the kinetic loom.
Right.
The focus plunges downward. The subcontrabass and double contrabass flutes enter, establishing those massive 15 hertz atmospheric pressure beds.
The structural pillars.
Exactly. And this is also where the electroacoustic chill-hop beats fully materialize. The microscopic key clicks we discussed form a rigid mechanical grid. So the abstract, searching breath from phase 1 is suddenly grounded by a heavy, physical, bodily pulse.
But the grid cannot hold it. Phase 3 is dissolution and complexity, spanning tracks 7 through 11. This includes shifting membranes, organism of air, axis of breath, the mirrored garden, and mechanical whispers.
This is the chaos phase.
Total chaos. This is the core of the symphony. The textures multiply exponentially. The contralto multiphonics take over, grinding the harmony into total dissonance.
And track 8, Organism of Air, is an absolute sensory overload.
It really is.
The acoustic identity of the flute is actively ripped apart by the granular synthesis algorithms. You can actually hear the melodies disintegrating into thousands of frozen electronic particles. It sounds like a hive of digital bees swarming a wind chime.
Wow, yeah. And the acoustic destruction in phase 3 necessitates phase 4, memory and reflection, which covers tracks 12 through 16th, echoes of the atlas, resonant membranes, the velocity of stillness, deep internal space, and memory of becoming.
Right.
After the chaotic dissolution, the AI renders the piece highly retrospective. The original piccolo motifs from track I resurface, but they are damaged. They are heavily processed, stretched out of time, and placed inside that cathedral-scale cavern reverb.
It is a deeply melancholic self-reference.
Very sad.
The piece remembers its own acoustic innocence, but the extreme digital processing means it can literally never return to it. The vast spatial environment creates this immense sense of isolation.
And finally, we hit phase 5, convergence and transcendence. Tracks 7 through XX, the convergence of breath, transfiguration of form, the final atlas, and dissolving into one.
The finale.
The entire 7-octave ecosystem basically collapses inward. The piercing piccolos, the rhythmic key clicks, the subterranean contrabass drones, they all slowly gravitate toward a single microtonal center. The boundaries between the acoustic flute recordings and the digital granular processing just completely vanished.
The total merge.
Yeah, the dissonance resolves into a massive, unified, deafening column of air that simply fades into the noise floor of the room.
The pacing of that 56-minute arc requires immense structural discipline. But the title of the work provides the exact framework for understanding it. A flute atlas of becoming.
Right.
The use of the word atlas is load-bearing here.
I was thinking about this. Let's map out what an atlas actually is compared to how we normally consume media.
Yeah.
If you watch a movie or read a novel, you are on a train track.
Yeah.
You start at point A and the author forces you through a linear narrative until point B. But an atlas is not a narrative. It is a spatial mapping of terrain. It's more like a chart of ocean currents or a topographical map of a mountain range. You don't read a map from left to right. You explore coordinates. You track elevations.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
In this piece, the terrain being mapped is human breath. Think about the physical mechanics of different instruments. For a violinist, the bow acts as the lung, applying friction to a string. For a pianist, the felt hammer is the lung, striking the wire. There is a mechanical intermediary.
But for a flautist, the human lung is the instrument's lung.
Exactly. The air leaves the diaphragm, crosses the embouchure plate, and is instantly translated into sound. There is no separation. In this symphony, breath is identity, the continuous transformation of that breath, its granular dissolution, its multiphonic fracturing. That transformation is the musical form. It is a cartography of human breath.
That framing is essential. The composer has constructed a topography of breath for the listener to navigate. However, to map an atlas of this magnitude, one with this many interacting variables and chaotic acoustic realities, you need a technological infrastructure capable of executing the impossible.
Yeah, the concept is great, but you need the tools to build it.
Exactly.
Right.
The conceptual brilliance of the 5 phases would be totally meaningless if the production methodology couldn't render it into high-fidelity audio.
Which brings us to the tech stack. The production methodology here is just as radical as the composition. We are looking at an ecosystem utilizing Google Flow Music, Claude.ai, ChatGPT, Perchance.org, and Audacity 4 running on a Linux Ubuntu 26.04 operating system.
The software choices reflect a very specific ethos. The project relies on an open-source operating system in Ubuntu and an open-source digital audio workstation in Audacity 4, which is actually currently in alpha build.
Wow, they used an alpha build for this.
Yeah. The composer is making a deliberate statement about the accessible frontier of high art. The tools required to generate, arrange, mix, and master a 56-minute symphonic masterpiece are largely free or highly accessible to the public.
The barrier to entry is no longer capital. It is solely conceptual rigor.
But while the software is accessible, the distribution format mandated by the composer is brutally strict. It is WAV 48 kHz and MP3 320 kilobits per second. We have to dive into why this lossless WAV format is not an audiophile luxury, but an absolute acoustic necessity for this specific piece.
Right. Usually the debate between lossless audio and compressed streaming formats like Spotify is about, slightly more air around a crash cymbal or the crispness of a vocal. It's totally negligible to the average listener.
But here, the compression algorithms fundamentally destroy the orchestration.
Oh, completely.
Audio compression formats like standard MP3s or AAC streaming files use psychoacoustic models to save file space. The algorithm analyzes the waveform and deletes data that it mathematically determines the human ear cannot perceive.
And because the human hearing threshold generally bottoms out around 20 hertz.
Exactly. The compression algorithm will look at the 15 hertz rumble of the double contrabass flute, label it as imperceptible noise, and digitally amputate it from the file.
It literally deletes the foundation of the symphony. Because, as we established earlier, you aren't supposed to hear those frequencies with your ear. You're supposed to feel them in your chest cavity.
Right.
If you run this atlas through a standard streaming algorithm, you are surgically removing the bottom 2 octaves of the ensemble.
You are silencing the very instruments that ground the chill hop rhythms in phase 2.
Yeah.
Now, looking at the generation engine itself, Google Flow Music. We have referenced the text prompt throughout this deep dive, but we must fully confront the revolutionary paradigm shift this represents. The text prompt is the musical score.
Let that sink in for a second.
Right. In the classical tradition, a composer spends decades studying orchestration, voice leading, and instrumental ranges to balance a symphony on staff paper. In this AI paradigm, the composer had to dictate register, extended techniques, spatial reverb structures, and emotional arcs, using purely semantic language.
And they had to do it with the exact same rigor. A prompt that says, make a sad flute song, yields absolute garbage.
Oh, 100%.
The composer has to write, generate a 48 kilohertz audio file featuring a contralto flute, executing a microtonally shifting multiphonic centered on G3, decaying over 14 seconds into broadband pink noise, layered over a 120 BPM rhythmic grid comprised solely of D4 key clicks.
That is a completely different skill set.
It really is.
To manage that linguistic complexity, the workflow incorporates large language models. The composer utilized Claude.ai and ChatGPT for conceptual development and prompt refinement. They were establishing a feedback loop.
Right, bouncing ideas.
The composer provides the structural intent, say, the transition from phase 1 to phase 2, and the language models help translate that abstract intent into the highly specific, syntactically rigid parameters that Google Flow Music requires to render the audio correctly without hallucinatory instruments popping up.
But a language model wants to be helpful, which means it fundamentally wants to be predictable. It seeks the most likely next word.
Right.
Music requires unpredictability. So the composer introduced _org into the stack. Perchance is a web-based text randomization tool. How does a composer use a randomizer alongside an AI that is actively trying to be predictable?
They use it to break the AI's habits. The composer built generators in Perchance that would output conflicting textural variables. It would randomly combine a register, an extended technique, and an electronic processing effect.
Okay, give me an example.
For example, the randomizer spits out subcontrabass flute plus crystalline motifs plus cathedral reverb.
Which makes no sense acoustically.
Exactly. The composer then feeds that absurd combination into the language model to formulate the prompt, forcing Google Flow Music to solve an impossible acoustic puzzle. It introduces genuine chance into the machine.
Wait, I have to pause here. If the linguistic prompt is the score, if a text randomizer is generating the variables, and an algorithmic engine is rendering the actual audio performance, where does virtuosity live now?
That is the million-dollar question.
For 400 years, virtuosity meant the brutal, physical mastery of the human body over a piece of wood or metal. It meant breath control, double tonguing, muscle memory etched into the fingers over 10,000 hours of practice.
Yeah.
If all of that physical execution is outsourced to a server farm, does virtuosity entirely abandon the physical embouchure? Is the new virtuoso simply the person with the most precise vocabulary to describe the sound they want?
It is the most profoundly uncomfortable question facing the modern conservatory system today.
I can imagine.
The definition of virtuosity is undeniably shifting. The physical execution, the embouchure, the lung capacity is outsourced. But the conceptual architecture, the aesthetic judgment, and the rigorous curation of the generated output remain intensely demanding.
It's not just a button press.
Not at all. The composer is not just pushing a button and accepting the first output. They are engaged in an exhaustive, iterative process. They might generate hundreds of variations of a single granular bass flute phrase. They evaluate them against the macroscopic structure of the 5 phases.
That makes sense.
It requires a deeply internalized knowledge of acoustics to even recognize when the AI has successfully rendered a multiphonic versus when it has simply produced digital artifacting.
So the curation is the performance.
Exactly.
This leads us directly into the broader philosophical debate surrounding breath between forms. When generative AI arrived, a significant portion of the musical community viewed it as an apocalyptic break from history, the death of the human author. But the text outlining this project establishes a very different thesis. It asserts that the composer remains the sole author, and the AI is merely an instrument.
And the analogy provided in the source material is highly illuminating. It compares the AI framework to a Bösendorfer imperial grand piano.
Okay, explain that way.
So, a standard piano has 88 keys. The Bösendorfer imperial extends the bass register, adding 9 extra keys down to a low C, giving it 97 keys total. When a human pianist sits down and utilizes those extra bass notes to play a massive resonant chord that would be physically impossible on a standard piano, we do not claim that the Bösendorfer composed the music. We recognize that the technology of the instrument simply expanded the physical reach of the human author. The AI tech stack functions in the exact same capacity.
It's just a bigger piano.
Exactly. It allows a single human mind to orchestrate, perform, and record a physically impossible 7-octave flute choir without displacing the human's ultimate compositional authority.
And if we look closely, this isn't a break from history at all. We can trace a direct, unbroken lineage from this 2026 AI collaboration straight back to the aleatory or chance-based music traditions of the 20th century.
Absolutely. Think of John Cage.
Yeah, the classic example.
In 1951, Cage composed The Music of Changes for solo piano. He didn't choose the notes based on his emotional intuition. He used chance operations. He tossed coins to consult the I Ching, an ancient Chinese divination text, and used the resulting hexagrams to determine the pitch, duration, and dynamics of every single note.
He used external probability to bypass his own ego and biological habits.
Precisely.
Or look at 𝗧𝗧𗃢. 𗗧𗃢 was an architect who realized that human intuition was too patterned to create the sound of true organic chaos, like the sound of rain hitting a tin roof or a swarm of cicadas.
So he used stochastic mathematics.
Right. He used formulas based on the kinetic theory of gases to distribute massive clouds of orchestral notes in his piece Metastases. He outsourced the micro-decisions to math so he could actually shape the macro structure.
Even composers operating within more traditional bounds, like Witold Lutosławski, used controlled aleatoricism. Lutosławski would write a fast, complex phrase for the woodwind section and instruct them to repeat it independently at their own individual tempos until the conductor gave the cue to stop.
Just creating a massive blur.
Yeah, he surrendered the precise rhythmic control to the performers to generate a blurred, complex texture that a single human brain could not possibly notate on a rigid grid. All of these historical figures introduced external processes to exceed their own rational limits.
The generative AI in breath between forms is just the modern evolution of that exact same lineage. The dice roll of John Cage's I Ching has simply been replaced by the probabilistic token prediction of a large language model. The text randomizer from Perchance acts as the coin toss. The AI generates unexpected sonic material like a violently compressed piccolo overblow or a phase offset bass flute loop. It throws that unpredictable material back at the composer, and the composer is forced to react to it, shaping it into the 5-phase structural arc.
It removes the physical friction of recording, but positions the human not as a laborer, but as the supreme curator of an expanded creative field.
And the brilliance of this piece is how the audio content perfectly mirrors the methodology of its creation. There's a constant dialectic tension in the sound.
Yeah, the friction.
You have the strict classical discipline of the C flutes, engaging in precise voice leading, constantly fighting against the experimental granular dissolution of the bass flutes. That acoustic friction order versus chaos is the exact procedural tension of a human interacting with a generative AI. Human intentionality fighting to harmonize with machine generativity.
It is beautifully parallel.
So what does this all mean? When we zoom out and look at the grand continuum of music history, every technological leap has been accused of displacing the artist.
Every single one.
The invention of the microphone was terrifying to opera singers because suddenly a crooner like Bing Crosby could whisper into a ribbon mic and dominate a mix without any vocal projection whatsoever.
Right.
The Cape recorder allowed Pierre Schaeffer to physically cut up environmental noises and invent music concrete, bypassing traditional instruments entirely. The Moog synthesizer, the MIDI protocol, the digital audio workstation. The musicians' unions actually protested synthesizers, claiming they would render orchestras obsolete. Purists claim digital debuts were cold and lifeless.
Yet none of those technologies killed human authorship.
Not a single one.
They merely expanded the artist's instrument set. They lowered the barrier to entry while simultaneously raising the ceiling of complexity. Generative AI is undeniably the most powerful and obviously the most intimidating rung on that ladder. But breath between forms proves that when this technology is wielded by a composer with deep acoustic knowledge and unyielding artistic rigor, it is fully capable of rendering masterpieces of profound emotional and structural weight.
It is an awe-inspiring topography of sound. To summarize the massive territory we've covered today, this 56-minute symphony successfully maps a 7-octave acoustic identity through a probabilistic AI framework. It navigates the extreme acoustic realities of 15 Hz double contrabass flutes and piercing piccolos. It integrates brutalist mechanical key clicks with the ethereal spectral processing of granular synthesis.
Yeah.
And it structures it all within a 5-phase, continuously evolving cartography of human breath. It is a living ecosystem of sound.
But as we conclude this deep dive, we have a very specific, strict call to action for you, the listener.
Yes, listen up.
You cannot passively consume this piece, you cannot put it on shuffle, and you cannot listen to it on your laptop speakers while answering emails. To truly comprehend the architecture we have spent the last hour dissecting, you must experience the entire structural arc of breath between forms in a single, uninterrupted 56-minute sitting.
No pauses.
Yeah.
No skipping tracks to try and find the techno beat.
Crucially, you must listen on high-quality studio headphones or a listening environment equipped with a subwoofer specifically capable of rendering the physical infrasonic frequencies of the double contrabass flute.
Otherwise, you're missing the point.
Exactly. If your playback system cannot reproduce frequencies down to 20 Hz, you are literally deleting the architectural foundation of Phase 2 and Phase 3. This work was designed from its absolute inception to be felt as a physical pressure in the room just as much as it is heard by the eardrum.
Which leaves us with one final lingering question to ponder long after this deep dive ends. We talked about how traditional musical scores provide comforting boundaries. We like knowing the limits of human biology. But this AI atlas has completely dissolved those blueprints. It has mapped an acoustic reality that technically shouldn't exist, utilizing lungs that never actually drew breath.
It maps an impossible future.
If a machine can now successfully map the intimate organic identity of human breath, if it can simulate an 8-foot column of moving air and stretch a bass flute exhalation into a 4-minute granular drone, what happens when human musicians begin to reverse engineer these AI generations?
Oh, wow.
Will the physical limitations of the human body, the finite capacity of our lungs, remain a permanent boundary for the acoustic flute? Or will this artificial atlas inspire the next generation of flautists to look at the impossible textures this AI has dreamed up and teach themselves how to physically play the impossible? Keep listening.